True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host, I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I wanted to come live to talk about the Nancy Guthrie case. I think so many of us have really been moved by her disappearance. She's 84 years old, disappeared from her home just outside of Tucson, Arizona. Essentially, she was dropped off by her daughter, Annie, and her husband at about between 9:30 and 9:45 on Saturday night. It's believed that at about 2 a.m., when her Apple Watch disconnected from her pacemaker, that she likely was abducted at that point. She initially was called in as missing at about 11 a.m. when she didn't show up for church. There's a lot that's going around right now, and I just wanted to kind of hone in on what we really know and what we really don't know, and what is happening in terms of this ransom note, this appeal, this possible kidnapping situation, just what is going on here. And again, everything I do here is from 28 years of being a federal special agent. That's my lens. Having cases not exactly similar to this, but certainly kidnapping cases. I say not similar because those cases involve gangs and drugs, which is oftentimes what we see happen in those circles. This is certainly somewhat different. But I can tell you that there's a lot that doesn't add up. And I just want to talk about the FBI's move in this and what's going on from that lens. So initially, of course, she was abducted, taken, and that's directly from the voice of the sheriff on this case. Now, the sheriff came out and spoke on numerous shows, met with Ashley Banfield and did Drop Dead Serious, did a very long interview there, interviewed with all sorts of other media and mainstream, national, social media. He was all over the place talking about this case. So we really gleaned a lot at that time. And then I think the next major thing that happened was 3 media outlets received ransom notes, right? What TMZ received one right away. They did a show on it. They said it was emailed. This came out straight away once they received this email of this ransom note. Now, I don't know if it's still up, the original show that they did, but I watched that over and over and over again. It took a bunch of screenshots, actually. And you could see in dark ink, actually, a phone number that was written on that. So it was very interesting, that whole situation, because although the FBI has to run aground all of those sorts of leads, there's no way you could ever just dismiss them as being a hoax or being somebody trying to take advantage of individuals who have somebody missing like this, because quite frankly, I'm going to tell you, that happens almost in most cases. It's terrible, but it just does. Individuals have people missing. The minute that they start broadcasting about it, then they are inundated with text messages and other type of messaging saying, we have your daughter, send us money, or we have your son, send us money. And unfortunately, this is just a scammer's dream to try to play off the emotion of a family that has a loved one missing. So this is very usual to see. Now, what is not usual is to see this happening 3 days after an abduction has been committed. I've never seen that. It was interesting. I was kind of going back with somebody on Twitter who said, yeah, but there's 3 cases and Google says this can happen for certain reasons. And one of the cases they talked about was the Getty case. But you remember in that case, that kid had a lot of issues and he kidnapped himself, really. And then that went awry because the kidnappers decided, you know what, we're going to go ahead and go through with this. I mean, they did terrible things to him. I think lopped off part of his ear and started sending, body parts or pieces to the family, and it's a long story, but that's the reason that you saw the delay in that case. And again, these are back in the days, that was in 1973, if I recall correctly. This is back in the day where you didn't have internet, you didn't have emails that people used widely. So, sorry, I've been sick. So, your ability to communicate was far different. I'm so sorry. Nevertheless, I just wanted to talk about what happened last night, because to me, this was huge. First of all, you had this family and it was very orchestrated. I want to make that clear for those of you who may not know that, but particularly BAU, this is what I believe the Behavioral Analysis Unit wrote what they said. I'm very, very certain of that. That's what they do. And there were particular points made in those letters, specifically one, the point was made to have empathy for their victim, right? To point out how wonderful she was, talk about God-fearing, she has health issues. All of that is done to hopefully incite some sort of empathy within the possible abductor. Secondarily, the point is to open a line of communication and throw the ball in their court, right? How many times have you had communication with somebody and you want to get a reply? It's very important that you say, I'm waiting on you. You know, I need a reply here. And they did that. They threw the ball out and said, reach out to us, which is also so concerning. Why, if they reached out and these emails, all I know is from TMZ, it came from an email. Why is there no way to to speak with them, or to, I should say, communicate? It was, I saw that number that was written on that letter, unless that was something that the abductor didn't write and somebody at TMZ wrote. That's a possibility. But it's very confusing as to why this is completely a one-way street. And I say that because if you've kidnapped somebody, you definitely don't want a one-way street, because how in the world you can give direction, but how in the world can you know that they're going to comply with any of your direction if they can't reach back out to you? So typically a kidnapper will offer that. They will say, leave a note here. At least the ones I've been involved with were literally, leave a note here, go here, leave the money here. There was one that was more of an extortion type case, but that one, I was the undercover that did the drop piece of it. So I'm very confused at how all of this is playing out. The delay, I'm confused. In other words, the delay of the demand, the fact that it's not a one-way street. But I can tell you, the FBI is taking this completely seriously, as they should, and they're running this aground. If this is a hoax, that's illegal, and they're going to, I believe, suffer a huge penalty for what they're doing. If it's not a hoax and truly she has been abducted and they have her, they are going to be waiting for some form of communication. Now, the question is there a separate ransom demand that has nothing to do with the three that were brought forth from the media? I think that's something that needs to be considered. Also, they mention AI and that they need true proof and something that is definitely not been altered or created, right? They talk about that when they make the appeal. Savannah does. So it makes me wonder if they already have a voice exemplar or some sort of imagery of her, and the FBI has not been able to determine whether it is real or whether it is AI generated. I know everybody thinks that is so easy, but in talking with the head that he's retired now, just about 2 years ago, the head of the BAU Digital Forensic Analysis Unit, that this would have been the exact case he would handle. And believe me, I'm going to call him and his wife and see if I can get them on earlier than the 16th. We're booked for the 16th of February. But my whole question is, my goodness, can they tell? He has told me you can only tell up to about a 90th percentile, I think was the percentile he gave me, even with everything they have. And I'm talking about if the AI generation is something that is done perfectly, something that is done by somebody who really knows what they're doing with the appropriate software. So when you think about all of that, it just makes me wonder, for them to do this plea and come forward, they're definitely giving legitimacy to a ransom note. I don't know what ransom note. I don't know if it's the Bitcoin, TMZ, or other ransom notes that went out, or if there's something separate, but they are giving legitimacy. I know everybody's saying, listen, there was no emotion from her son and little emotion from Annie. Of course, a lot of emotion from Savannah. Listen, at this point in dealing with families that are going through things like this, missing children particularly, it's so draining. You could see in Savannah's face and in her eyes how very drained she was. Obviously, there's makeup doesn't matter. Your hair doesn't matter. All that matters is her mom. And that came off so genuine and so raw, even though I believe the words she was reading, they were handed to her to read. It was very orchestrated from the standpoint of Savannah was in the middle in a light colored shirt. She spoke first. She spoke last. I mean, I know the brother said a couple words, but I'm talking about what they had to say and what I'll call their appeal. Their appeal to open up communication, their appeal that they are willing to talk, their appeal to have empathy for their mom. These are the major points that the behavioral analysis unit wanted to get across to whoever might be the abductor. Now, I want to say this too. As an investigator, when you're in a case, you have to keep your mind open and your eyes open to all possible paths. It makes absolutely no sense to me that in the rural environment, now I'll call it rural because in an urban environment, I consider it where you literally could take was going to say shoot a spitwad, but that's not very nice. You could just throw something light and hit your neighbor, right? You're talking about 10, 20 yards between houses. That's not the situation here. People had acreages and there was serious light issues because this is an environment. I lived in a house like this. You can look it up, Westlake, Texas. They have light pollution laws, which means you can't have your front porch light on, you can't have floodlights on, you're not allowed to have lighting. And the reason is because we could walk out of our houses and look up at the sky and have a black blanket of just stars coming out. It's gotten a little worse there when I've gone back. But when we lived in Westlake, it was unbelievable. Same with, I'm from a farm. I lived on a farm, we still have our farm and all our acreage, whole family's there. And there's so little light that you have that same phenomena happen. That's what was going on here. What does that mean? That means for Ring cameras, street cameras, Tesla cameras, all the other cameras that could have been in and around that neighborhood, so little would be seen. All we know for sure is that one Ring/Nest camera is gone. There's been reporting about others smashed, and that could be accurate. But I want to stick with what we know. We know there were blood drops, okay, not spatter. What I mean by that is when you strike somebody or hit somebody, there is spatter if blood is projected that occurs. That's the splatter type pattern. I want to make it clear, I'm not a blood spatter expert, but had cases with blood spatter in it. So I'm familiar with these types of issues. And if you look at these droplets that show a trail out of that front door, I think there's one place where it does spatter. And to me, that shows wherever I believe Nancy was bleeding from, it dropped multiple times, which caused that spatter pattern just outside the door. I believe that was when they closed the door, closed that front door. Could it be? Is it possible that she was walking? There's reports that her cane was left behind. Police have not said that, but there is reporting about that. So that is a possibility that she could have walked. But remember, her own children said that her walking situation, she could barely walk. I think they said 50 yards. That's not very far. Could she have just been, we all saw her skin is very thin. In the pictures I posted, it showed how she had a lot of bruising. That is so usual with people who are on blood thinners. So I don't want to make a lot out of that she suffered some abuse or anything. That's not what I'm seeing. People on pacemakers, we know she had a heart condition, take drugs like Coumadin. That thins out the blood and causes that easy bruising underneath. I still say this particular case, how was she targeted? How did they choose her? Was it specifically related to Savannah? You know, Savannah has money. You can look it up. She's worth, I think, about 40 million, something like that. So they would know that they would have somebody. But I'm telling you, there is a nexus in some way to someone who knows her closely, whether that's family, whether that is a worker at her home, a yard keeper, her housekeeper, somebody who is involved with her or has been involved with her. I still believe, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If this ends up just being some random cartel group that came across and decided to pick particularly her house. But my whole thing is with that, how do they even know she's home? How do they know she's going to be home at 2 o'clock in the morning? There's a familiarity, a personal nature to this, whether it ends up being an abduction or not, that it seems like that nexus would exist. And I could tell you just from my experiences, my training, and studying, there's typically some sort of nexus for them to know she's home, for them to understand where cameras are located. The fact they didn't take the medication, that is really concerning. We're also on day 5. That's really concerning, considering what they have said. And that was, family has said that within 24 hours, it can become a situation, a lethal type situation. I mean, she needs blood thinners. I just wanted to touch on all of this, specifically that appeal. I hope everyone who has any sort of platform, anybody who's on X or on Instagram or TikTok, please post that. It might appeal to somebody who might know something. I mean, let's face it, if there's an abductor, these abductor or abductors have families. They have friends, they have people they associate with that would notice all of a sudden that these people or person is not around anymore because they would have to be with her. You know, I did want to say, in looking up cases, there is a 2019 case where an individual was abducted from Tucson, was taken across to the Mexican border. I believe he was in a trunk. He was a Dominican man, and later recovered and found by the FBI in conjunction with the Mexican authorities. So can it happen? Absolutely. I really need to research that case because I'm very curious as to how he was targeted and if there were any insiders in that case that helped, point out when he would be home, point out where cameras could be, point out if there would be anybody else in the house, right? These are all factors that an abductor would want to know before abducting someone. Again, those notes don't sit right with me. The timing doesn't sit right with me. But this could be one of those outliers, an outlier that doesn't add up with the usual situation. And so the FBI is obviously taking this very seriously. I'm going to glance down and see. Let's see. She wasn't robbed. She obviously was the target. To me, it was a target that, when I say target, she was focused upon for a very specific reason, if indeed this ends up being an abduction. Any other in chat? Let me make sure. I just want to answer any questions that might be in chat. Oh, I want to put these up also on the screen so everybody can see these comments if you're not participating in chat, but just watching the video. Yeah, okay, I want to talk a little bit about that. So the siblings. Let's first talk about Annie. These are both older siblings of Savannah. Savannah's the youngest. And Annie certainly came off very emotionless. There was one break at one point, a little bit in her voice, but no tears, no crying, no sobbing. I want to make it clear, though, I'm not judging that, because I've seen where people get emotionally depleted in a case like this. They literally, it's very difficult to keep that level of intensity, of sadness and concern and emotion. Especially these people might, when I say these people, Savannah, Annie, the brother, might not have even slept much over the last 5 days. You can imagine. Wondering if that call might come in from police, wondering if a ransom demand is going to come in. So I don't want to be too judgmental. We saw how emotional Savannah was. And, that plea was very heartfelt. Again, so I think it's hard to be completely heartfelt when you're reading something somebody wrote, but it was important that it was outlined the way it was for the reasons that the behavioralists know works in some of these situations. I saw what a lot of you saw, and certainly the brother was very, leaning back, arms at least half crossed, arms, definitely not open on this situation. And that, that is an indicator that, well, typically it's an indicator that they don't want to be there, but who would want to be in this situation? So I understand what you're saying, but I hold off any judgment on how they were acting or the lack of emotion at this time. Why didn't the brother read anything? I truly believe it was because they had practiced with him reading and it wasn't coming off well. Maybe it just seemed without emotion, or maybe he said, I don't want to do that. But nevertheless, I think for all of us, that was very obvious. He did say a few words at the end. But I want to talk a teeny bit about what's going on behind the scenes, because I think a lot of people want to know, well, what's the FBI, what's law enforcement doing right now? And right now, recall, they went back to the scene and they took more evidence. This wasn't just a small search. They had dogs out there. They had a search of the perimeter, of the curtilage, of the entirety. It looked to me they were doing a grid search of that yard again. I saw camera footage inside. They were clearly searching. The garage was focused on. I truly believe, and again, this is so very rare, but I believe they obtained a secondary search warrant, likely because when the FBI got involved and started looking at what was done in the initial search, what was collected, the FBI was not satisfied, and they believed it was important to redo the search and to search other areas more intently. That's what I'm seeing. It would have been different if I would have saw them go back and start digging in the yard in a particular location. That's not what happened. This looked like a complete redo to me, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Um, if the local folks that handled the search were not trained to the level of the FBI's evidence response team. Remember, they're getting in on this late, really on about day 3-ish. That's when they got involved. So it's an eternity after something like this. They needed to be called in right away, but they weren't. So they're playing catch up. I initially thought maybe somebody had cooperated and said something. That really crossed my mind. But when I saw the totality of the search being conducted, it really made me believe that they're redoing it. That requires, by the way, and I've never seen it. I've never seen it where a secondary search warrant was approved to go back and search the same location. Why? Because this is what you have to show. You have to not only show probable cause to believe there's evidence there, or probable cause to believe there's a crime committed and that there is evidence. You have to show that it would be there. You have to show it's there in terms of timeliness. That's why it's very difficult to obtain search warrants for things when they have been weeks and months and years after a crime, even though a crime would have happened there, because you have to convince a judge that there's probable cause to believe it would still be there. Now, I've seen that. For instance, blood, and then they pulled up the carpet and look, it's right there in the concrete or in the wood that's underneath that carpet. So it can be done, but I think here likely they had to put in wording that the garage wasn't thoroughly searched, or that they did not conduct a grid search, or that they failed to search these different locations. Anyway, that's what I'm seeing after I saw the full context of this search. So right now, the FBI and their partners are looking over all that information they collected, all those things the evidence that they took out. And I want to make it clear, whenever you see boxes and envelopes and things being taken from a location, the FBI does not make it a business to take anything they don't believe is evidence. In fact, it becomes a huge pain in the neck, because at the end of the case, you cannot close your case until all your evidence has been disposed of one way or the other. That either means it needs to be burned, it needs to be returned to the original person. And so you can imagine it's a huge headache. I remember sitting there in the evidence room with piles of evidence and, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this evidence? Everybody's in prison. That was typically the biggest problem. So then I have to get their permission to burn everything, guns and all of that. So I just wanted to comment that the FBI is not taking things that they don't believe is going to be important to the investigation, and they're pouring over all of that right now. The other thing is the FBI is going to be pressuring those providers that are not providing this video evidence. This is really unheard of, and it's something you have to stay on. I'm going to tell you the practicality of all of this. Literally, when you get either a warrant or a subpoena for this information, for the electronic records, and you're dealing with whatever it may be, AT&T, or you're dealing with Apple, or whatever it may be, it's so critical. And I did this as an agent. I'm sure agents are still doing this. I wanted to know the name of the person that's pulling the record, right? Because typically what happens is it goes to the FBI, from the FBI, and it goes to the provider's legal department or the intake department. Then it goes to the legal department, and then they look it over and make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And then from there, they're going to send it to a supervisor over the department that handles that. And then from there, that supervisor is going to give it to a line computer person. It's going to be on his desk along with piles and piles and piles of other subpoenas and warrants, and others that say their cases are exigent and urgent as well. And then that operator is going to type it in and print off hard copies possibly, but certainly electronically email that to the FBI or to the law enforcement entity that asked for it. This is literally the process. And I always, the minute that I got that return, I had a Rolodex because that's what I used. I know that's a long time ago, but that's what I used to say, oh my gosh, I got an AT&T subpoena for this. And I would call them only when it was an important situation and say, listen, can you get mine on the top? Can you help me out here? Because sometimes the people, by the time it filters clear down to that clerk that's handling it, that's the most important person in the whole thing to make sure you get your records, they don't realize the urgency. And these are the pragmatic points that I think a lot of people may not think about that's actually happening. And the sheriff was clear at his last presser a couple of days ago. He said, we just don't have everything, and that he's discussed it too. I can tell you the FBI is going to be all over that, all over putting the pressure that's necessary to get the documents so that the analysts now, so behind the scenes, there's FBI analysts. They're not agents. They're analysts. They're amazing. And that is what they do. They dig through all of these records, put together a report, give it to the case agents, and the case agents look it over and basically see how that information that they've put together and collated as being important fits into the overarching investigation. So that's what you're going to see right now. Also, you're going to have analysts, I believe, that are just strictly looking over the video they do have. That means just like I'm staring into this camera, that means they are literally, they can't look away, they can't have coffee, they can't go to the bathroom without pausing. When you do these camera reviews, you're looking at every single second because it just takes a second for a car to pass or for a dark figure to appear between a bush. So they are looking at all the surveillance videos that they do have. And remember, I mentioned these are dark conditions. So it's going to take a lot of work. And in addition, if it's so dark they don't have anything, there's a video enhancement and audio enhancement. Don't forget, some of these Ring cameras have audio, mine does, that they can actually enhance. And so units could also be working on that. So you might have a video that you're looking at and you're like, gosh, this just isn't going to help me out. And then you send it up to Quantico and they can work on the enhancement. But again, they're looking at all these enhancements, other videos that they need enhanced that are in their pile. So you have to get it moved to the top of the pile. I think because President Trump came out and put some pressure, purportedly, I read that Kash Patel is headed there and going to head up in the investigation. As I said before, the person that I want out there, anybody, any agents, and they're becoming rare, that have kidnapping experience, they should be there, as well as individuals that have experience with this type of a disappearance, an abduction of the elderly. Because once you've gone through these things, that's where you learn, just like in any profession. So it's critical they have people there that have had cases like this and can help. What else are they doing behind the scenes right now? They're also monitoring anything and everything that could result in getting communication. That means the cell phones of these children. Is it possible that the abductors have them? It's possible. We really don't know what abductors they're talking to. We really don't. It's very up in the air. Trying to think. Those are the main issues right now. Also, those continued interviews, witness interviews, also the hundreds of leads. Last we knew they had about 200. Those are going to be triaged in terms of the wackadoodles calling in from the people who have legitimate concerns, and then agents and officers are going to go out and conduct face-to-face interviews with the people that they believe might have information that could be important. Remember, U.S. Customs, ICE, obviously is going to need to be involved in this because Mexico is so close. And is it possible she was taken through the border? So you have all that possibility of video coverage and so forth, that is something that they're going to have to see if they can line out. That's going to be, I can't even imagine the man hours involved in that. But it's something that has to be looked into. There's just so much. I'm glad the FBI is in on this. It's critical. I didn't hear any other federal agencies. Oh, I know something I wanted to comment about is ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Division. We saw their, people out there with that, and they have very unique training in terms of digital analysis and forensic analysis. And I think that's possibly why they were out there, but I don't want to discount this. And that is, as an example, I had a HIDA jacket. That's a high intensity drug trafficking jacket, right? So when I would go out on raids, I often wore my HIDA jacket, not because I was working on a drug case, but because that was my FBI jacket. Typically, agents have all sorts of jackets, but they might be wearing their specialized jacket. It might be their lightest weight jacket. It might be their favorite jacket. So it's not that I'm not trying to make too much of that, because I did see a backpack and possible equipment that was associated with them. And again, they have specialized training in digital forensic analysis related to, obviously, internet crimes against children. So I think that they probably were there in their own capacity, but I just wanted to point that out. When you see different jackets of different associations that different agents have, I just wanted to point that piece out. Let me see. Yeah. They're taking this seriously. They believe they likely have a kidnapping on their hands. That is crystal clear. I want to know how she was picked. There's just so much. It's not adding up for a typical kidnapping situation. You guys, I'm going to stay on this. I'm going to stay on this. And I really hope Nancy Guthrie is alive and well and can be returned. And I'm in prayer for the Guthrie family and in prayer for law enforcement, that they can have wisdom as they go through this, and keep an open mind, follow each lead and the direction it may go in. All right, everyone. Until next time, may justice be served.